Yes.
Lesson 4. 110. Ready, go.
What happened here? I'm not sure. 1 second.
It's thinking.
It's not thinking, that's the problem.
It's buffering.
Why did it? I apologize to those on the Zoom. We are experiencing technical difficulties. Unfortunately, this isn't uncommon. Okay, I think we're back. Do you guys hear me and see the Zoom? Okay, perfect. Very good. Here we go. Today, you are in for a treat and a surprise. I think today's lesson is, however practical, foundational, and important lessons 1 through 3 were, as of this week, we still have 2 more weeks to get even more into it. But I think this week will be the most eye-opening, not necessarily that it will, it's a reality you weren't familiar with, but it will help explain life the way we know it that seems so mystifying, complex, and hard to understand. Hopefully we will shed some light. We'll start with the exercise on page 111 in your book. And very quickly, just in 30 seconds, 40 seconds, respond just instinctively to each of these questions. Don't respond for your spouse, or don't respond the way you think they would respond to the question. Just respond to these questions very quickly, 40 seconds, and then we'll continue.
How come the first 2 are ones are positive, ones are negative?
We're going to get to that. Just respond to the questions, and you'll see. You'll see. Hopefully, you'll see the idea of what we're trying to convey with this exercise. Okay, welcome to lesson 4. And I'm not going to ask you to share your answers, but I do have 2 questions that I'd like by the raise of hand, just to see a show of hands. The first question is, did you find it difficult to give a definitive answer to any of these questions? Okay. What about, did you find yourself giving contradictory yes answers to 2 opposing statements? Okay. So human beings are complex creatures. We are mystifying. On the one hand, we aspire, a part of us at least, aspires to be altruistic, connected to God, spiritual. On the other hand, a part of us is governed by selfish desires, by hedonistic instincts. There's 2 friends that met each other on the street, and one looks at his friend and he looks very, very worried. So he says, what's going on? So he says, you'll never believe it. 4 weeks ago, my great uncle died and left me $20,000. That's not a reason to be worried. What else happened? It says 3 weeks ago, I had an uncle that died and left me $40,000. That's still not a reason to be, said 2 weeks ago, last week, a cousin died and left me $150,000. So the friend looks at him and says, so why is your face so down? So he says, this week, nothing. I know none of us think this way, but there is a part of us that, and this raises the question, what's going on under our hood? right? We're driving the car of the human being, and it's like the car's working and it's not working. It's working and it's not working. The engine light turns on and then it goes off and then it turns off. What's going on over here? What's happening under our hood? So Kabbalah explains that this conflict is rooted in the fact that we have, and some of you who have been coming here for a while will know this. Those of you who join our Tanya class will know this. We have not one soul, but two souls. Let's look at text 1, page 112. This is from the first 2 chapters in Tanya. The first of our souls originates in non-holiness. This soul resides in our bloodstream to vitalize our body. Okay? So the first soul is non-holiness. It is the source of all our negative character traits, as well as those positive traits that come naturally to us, such as compassion and kindness. Okay? A Jew's second soul is an actual part of the transcendent God. This is the text. Let's dissect this for a moment. There are 2 theaters of consciousness. There are 2 worlds happening within the person. There is the first soul. Now, it's called the first soul, although it's what he terms here the animal, not here, but in the rest of Tanya, he calls the animal soul, the animalistic soul, which is nefesh habehamit. It's the first because it's the first that comes into the person. And this soul, to be clear, it's called the animal soul, but it's not because it's the soul of an animal. To be clear, this animal soul is a uniquely human soul. It's far more sophisticated, possesses qualitatively greater intelligence, and has free choice, something that an animal doesn't have. The reason we call it an animal soul, is because it has animalistic tendencies in that its primary focus is its own needs. Even if it's not selfish, it's survival. It's physical needs, just what it needs. It looks out for itself. Also, self-gratification, okay? So not just survival instincts, but even to make my life better, to make my life more enjoyable. Now, what's unique here is that it's not only the source of selfish or negative traits, it's also the source of positive traits, assuming those positive traits are for myself, for me. So if one day I wake up and I decide, I'm feeling a little generous today, and you go out and look for a charity and you give a nice donation. That was a mitzvah, right? Where did that come from? Came from the animal soul. It was feeling the need to give. It was looking to express itself. It wanted to feel good about itself. It gave. It was a good trait, right? You went and helped someone out physically, you volunteered, whatever it is. But if you did it because you felt the need to do it, or you wanted to feel good about yourself, this all comes from the animal soul. Now, although it is called animal soul, and we are going to refer to it as the animal soul because we want to learn this term nefesh habehamit, as we'll soon see, the animal soul. In other places in Kabbalah, it's referred to as the natural soul. Okay, so that's, but natural also doesn't, animal soul is more of a descriptive, animal soul and natural soul maybe is more true to its essence, but animal soul is more descriptive, which is why we use that terminology. So it could be a very good soul, but it does it because it wants to do it. However, because the animal soul is in it for itself, it can also rationalize and justify immoral behavior. Okay, so it's true. Immoral behavior stems from the animal soul. Good behavior also stems from the animal soul. Okay, we didn't discuss yet what the godly soul is yet. Okay, right now the animal soul is the first soul that enters the body, and that is for the first Hebrew Kabbalistic terminology of the day, nefesh habehamit. Animal soul, again, the definition is that it is self-oriented. However, we also have a second soul, and this is the nefesh elokit. This is the godly soul. Now, the godly soul yearns to have a relationship with God. It yearns to have a relationship with other souls. It yearns not what it wants to fulfill or accomplish. It yearns to do whatever God wants it to accomplish or fulfill. In other words, it's focused on what God wants, not what it wants. Right? What did President Kennedy say? Ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. Yeah. So the animal soul, and by the way, that is human nature. Naturally, we don't ask what we can do for our country. We ask what our country can do for us. We're expected to mature and grow up and develop an understanding of what we can do for others. But the natural soul, the first soul, is the self-centered soul. What can you do for me? The second soul, and the reason it's called second is because it actually comes second. The beginning of the entry of this godly soul into the body begins at conception, at birth. It evolves at birth. But really at birth and at bris, at the circumcision. But its complete entry is by the bar mitzvah, bar and bar mitzvah. A bar and bar mitzvah is when the person becomes complete. Up until the bar and bar mitzvah, what's dominant is the animal soul. You can't expect a kid to be responsible to do a mitzvah when the dominant part of them is thinking about what they want, not what God wants. The bar and bar mitzvah is when the godly soul completely enters the body, and it's at that point that you can expect of a child, now an adult, to ask not what his country or what God can do for him, but what he can do for God. So this is the second terminology, nefesh elokit. So nefesh means soul. The first one is nefesh behamit. Behema is an animal. Nefesh elokit is the godly soul.
Is it H-A-B-E-H or B-A?
Well, ha-bahamit means the. Nefesh behamit would be animal soul. Nefesh ha-bahamit would be the animal soul. Now, so we have two souls. That's why we're pulled in two directions. We're selfish and we're giving. Yeah. Which one is stronger? Which soul is stronger?
Animal.
Oh, so Hasidus tells us that, as indicated by the name, animal soul, the animal soul is stronger. What's stronger, an animal or a human being? For most human beings and most animals are stronger than human beings, right? The trunk of an elephant can lift like 600 pounds or something, just the trunk of the elephant itself. So just by its definition, an animal soul, let's look here, text 2 on page 113. The ox's strength, this is a verse from Proverbs. The ox's strength produces abundant crops. That is to say, the animal soul's drive is more potent than the godly soul's drive. And that's why when it's 10 degrees below zero outside and there's a Parsha class Tuesday night, some people will text, it's too cold, we'll stay home. And at the other end of town, you have 80,000 people sitting in a stadium cheering for some people throwing the ball around. Or you might post a picture on Facebook of the steak that you're eating in a restaurant, but you're not going to post a picture of the tefillin you're wearing or of the tzedakah you put in the tzedakah box. Why? Because the animal soul is a much stronger drive. It's a much stronger but by definition, by its nature, is much stronger. Now, these two souls, the animal soul and the godly soul, are in constant competition with each other. Who will control the body? Right? So if I had two sets of arms, two sets of legs, and two hearts, one set would go to the Talmud class and one set would go to the ball game. But God created me with two souls and one body. And so there's this constant conflict. Who am I going to listen to? Who am I, being the body? Who is going to control the body? I am the animal soul versus the godly soul, depending on any moment who I'm feeling more, but who am I going to be? You know, the salesman that was walking around the neighborhood selling things, he comes to the house and he hears screaming and yelling inside, and a husband and wife screaming at each other. So he's like a little apprehensive to knock on the door. Suddenly there's a break in the screaming, so he knocks on the door, and someone yells from inside, "What do you want?" So he says, "I'd like to speak to the boss of the house." So the voice comes out, "You've arrived in perfect timing." That's exactly what we're trying to figure out at this moment. A 1 minute, a question came in. Is it a Jewish soul only or all humans? Okay, so the way it's discussed in Kabbalah is a Jewish soul. However, although it is true that only Jews possess the soul the way we're going to describe it today, however, God created all people in order that, and if Jews were created with an extra soul that everyone else didn't have, there wouldn't really be free choice. So God did create this drive and desire in every person to be altruistic, to be other focused. However, it's not exactly the same as the Jewish soul, at least the way it's discussed in the source texts for this class. And again, it's because the texts are written for Jews, so that's the way it's described. Ultimately, it says that even non-Jews, the pious amongst them, will have a place in the world to come, which means they do have this godly soul that is eternal. So there is, to some degree, a godly soul, an eternal spark present within every person, and it's not the animal soul. It's an added thing that does exist in every human being, at least the potential for it. Yes?
Yeah, but in other religions, they only talk about one soul.
Oh, so so we'll soon see. So when we say, you know, let's get to that in a second. Let's look at the course map for a moment. So in lessons 1, 2, and 3, we discussed the sort of the image of the human being, right? The garments, and then the essence of the human being, and the desire from which everything comes. And what we're learning today is that everything we learned in lesson 1, 2, and 3, we all have not once, but twice. Okay? Because we don't have just one soul, we have two souls. Each soul is made up of 10 attributes and 10, right? So each soul has a desire, which is the root of where the 10 attributes come from in order to implement that desire, and then it has the garments that actually bring that desire and all of the knowledge and emotions that went into it into practice. So we discussed last week that there's a human instinct, right? The desire. We remember there's an innate desire, like the desire to the love a parent has for their child, the desire to live. These are, last week we bunched them together with the desire to connect to God, which is innate in but really they come from two different souls. The desire, the innate desire to love your children isn't a godly desire. It's your natural, it's your continuation, your legacy, your continuation. That's a natural, instinctive a human animalistic quality, whereas the desire to connect to God is from the godly soul. Now, this raises a question. Question is, we learned during the past 3 lessons that the reason we have this image to our body, to our soul, to our makeup, is because it reflects the divine image, right? Biyah is our thought, speech, and action. Atzilus is the 10 attributes, right? The 10 faculties. So if Sefer Hishtalshalut, remember the order of devolution, if the way God created the spiritual worlds is in order that we should compare to it, then why do we have 2 souls? We should have 1, right? If there's 10 attributes in Atzilus, so we should have 10 attributes. Why do we have 20? If we're supposed to be in the image of God, we should have 10, not 20. And not only do we have 20, but the 10 additional ones that we have that are animalistic are sort of opposing God, right? They are drawing away from God. Where does all this come from? Where did this start? And not only that, it's stronger, right? It's stronger than the godly soul. So this is what we are going to discuss today. Now, just if you will, we will put away our maps. So just so you'll see before we do, today is lesson red, the red lesson. And you'll see on each side there are 10 circles. Okay. However, unlike in Atzilus, where they are in 3 columns, here they are in 2 columns. And unlike in Atzilus, where they are colored in 2 different colors, each circle has 2 colors. These circles only have 1 color. And that brings me to the next point here, which in order to solve this dilemma, we are going to need to take a significant detour. We're going to have to explain and discuss one of the most difficult areas in Kabbalah to understand and to discuss, but we need to in order to understand what's going on. So if you'll notice here on the board or in your map, each circle, as I mentioned, each sephira has 2 parts, 2 colors. Let's look at text 3 from the Zohar. The king is present within the 10 attributes of Atzilut. He and his vessels are one in that world. He and his lights are one in that world. Okay, so we have to have an awareness that's going to be created here, and that is that whereas in Biyah, remember that's the last 3 worlds, that's the first lesson we did, thought, speech, and action, they have their own identity, they are creations, and therefore they have an identity that is distinct from the creator. Atzilus is one with its creator. It's the light that emanates from God. So it's one with its source, right? So the king is one with Atzilus, with the 10 attributes. That's the first line in this text that we just read. The king is present within the 10 attributes of Atzilut, right? Because the 10 attributes are a light. Light is a light from the source. So God is present within these 10 attributes. However, he doesn't suffice with that and goes on to say that he is one with his vessels and one with his light. So what is this light and vessel? In the language of Kabbalah, light is the energy, abstract energy behind any given reality. I'm going to explain just in a moment. While the vessel is the structure that shapes it. Okay, look on page 115 for some examples of how we are going to explain this. Let's take a book. We'll start with a book. A book that has words, but the words convey no ideas. Is that a book? It's not, you wouldn't call that a book, right? You'd call that a bunch of papers with ink. Ideas that are not developed into words are also not a book. What's a book? A book is paper with ink, with letters, that convey an idea. So in this analogy, the idea is the light, the book is the vessel. Okay? You want to drink water. You need to have a vessel to contain the water within it so you can drink it. Your vessel might be a cup, it might be your hands, it might be the bottle, it might be a spout, whatever it is, but it's something that contains the light so that it can accomplish something else. Let's take another one, relationship, yeah? If I love someone, but I don't do anything to express that love, is that love? What is it? Fantasy. Yeah? If I buy flowers and say kind things to someone I don't even know or care about, is that love? Also not, right? That's just a whole bunch of mumble jumble. Love has to have a light and vessels. Light is the idea, is the energy, is the feeling, whereas the vessels are the whatever it is that contains and that can shape that energy into whatever it is you're describing, right? Now, let's remember when we begin to think about this, that we're talking about godliness here, we have to strip all the physicality away from it because we're talking about spiritual divine subjects here. We're not talking about physical vessels and things that have colors and shapes. Here's a simple way to understand this, or the simplest way, or whatever. You get the point. When God decided that he wants to create a world, and in order to get there, he is going to begin by emanating the 10 sefirot from himself. That's like turning on the light bulb and the light coming out. But that light, because it is an expression of the source, and the source is infinite, and infinite doesn't just mean it has no end. It also means it has no definition. It has no shape or any type of defining characteristics. Its only defining characteristic is that it's not definable. That's what it means to be infinite. So what is going to be the first light that comes out of this light bulb? Undefined light. So if God wants to emanate 10 sefirot, the light that's going to come out is not going to be divided necessarily or look like 10 different sefirot. It's going to look like perhaps 10 beams of light, yeah, like raw energy. It's going to be like 10 beams of light, but there's nothing that makes one beam of light different than another beam of light. And remember that it's conveyed by the terminology light, because light expresses its source. That's the definition of light. And if the source is infinite, then the light, remember last week, that was one of the words we learned, or Ein Sof, the infinite light. Let's imagine you have colored light bulbs. How do you make colored light bulbs? So you take the same internals, you put it into each light bulb, and you paint the glass. Yeah? So the light, it all comes from the same place. It all looks the same. If you just took the light without the vessel, you wouldn't see chesed, you wouldn't see chokhmah, you wouldn't see all the individual sefirot. Imagine for a second, you came home from work and you found out that your child was bullied at school in the playground. And you're very disturbed. This is the energy, you're disturbed. But you didn't decide yet, or you don't know yet, where that energy will be channeled. Will you make an angry phone call to the principal? Will you shower your child with extra love because of the difficulty they're having in school? Will you maybe even have compassion on the bully because you know that kids bully because they themselves have a very difficult time and are lacking in many areas? You don't know yet where that energy will be channeled, right? There's no vessel. The energy is you could feel the blood boiling, but you don't know yet what type of vessel that is going to vest itself into. So God emanates from himself light. That light is definitionless. It doesn't have a definitionless. It doesn't have a definition. It doesn't have names. How does the light get the name? When it is vested into a vessel. What's a vessel? A vessel is an emanation from God. It could be, it's like a sleep, it could be, I have to move around the mouse more often, I don't know. The vessel is more of a light, also a light that comes from God. That's what the Zohar says. God is one with the light. God is also one with the vessels. The vessels also come from God, but they've gone through a more coarsening process to make them sort of more distant from God, that they can start to turn into definable entities. That one is chesed, one is gevura, etc. So, if you're lucky enough to have lights that connect with the vessels, then you have the 10 Sefirot. This is what happens when the light comes into the vessel. Now you have divine light that becomes the light of Chachma, the light of Bina. This is what God wanted, the fusion with the light, between the light and the vessels, while both light and vessels are one with God. And this is how we begin the process of devolution to get to our world where we are created in the image of God.
So each of those is a vessel?
Is light in a vessel. That's why it has two colors in your book, and it has like two shades. It's light in a vessel. The light, if you looked inside of it, again, we're using very physical terminology here, but we have to strip it. But imagine you looked inside the vessel, you would see the same light in each vessel. But if you're standing outside the vessel, you see different lights. You see different color light bulbs. If you walk into you see these LED bulbs, you're seeing different colors, but really it's all the same light. You stripped all the bulbs of the glass, of the covers, you would see the same light. Let's look in text 4a. The light itself is in a state of simple abstractness. The vessel imposes a definition on the light in the form of a particular attributes of wisdom, kindness, and so forth. By the way, the vessel, although we're not really focused on that now, the vessel doesn't really impose its will on the light. Because if the light were ever to separate from the vessel, it would be definitionless. But it's imposing its will on the light from our perspective. So when we're looking at it, we see Chachma light and Chesed light instead of godly light. Okay, so I love Sarah, and I don't know a Sarah. That's a vessel. If you said I love Sarah and you don't know a Sarah, that's a vessel that's useless. If you buy flowers and you give them to no one, not even yourself, that's light, but it has nowhere to be. It's also definitionless. So what did you accomplish with these flowers? Yeah. But if you have flowers and you gave it to someone, now you have a light in a vessel, and now you have a beautiful relationship. Okay? So far, so good. Now, very quickly, one more accomplishment that happens between lights and vessels. So the first accomplishment is that the vessels give definition to the light, and the light gives content and meaning to the vessels. Another thing that happens is, what does light want to do naturally? Naturally, light wants to be consumed within its source. When I'm in love with someone, yeah, all I want to do is spend time with them. I don't want to do anything else in the world. I want to be consumed with the object of my love. If I'm loving a good book or I'm loving a good sandwich and my child disturbs me or distracts me, it's very frustrating. The more I love the book, the more engrossed I am within the book, the more upset I am at any distractions. So light wants to be consumed within its source. And remember, light is an emanation from God. So all light wants to do is be closer and closer and closer to God. A vessel, what is the definition of a vessel? A vessel is to bring an idea down to, to bring water down to the person, to bring an idea from my head onto paper so I can give it to someone else. Yeah. So the vessel wants to go down, the light wants to go up. What happens when we bring vessels and lights together? Now we have a productive relationship. Now I could be in love with something and understand at the same time I need to go out and work in order to provide. So I have to go away in order to be able to come back. I understand that if I just focus on my love, the light won't be able to manifest in vessels, and it'll just be consumed, and there won't be a relationship. Yeah.
Also, don't the vessels separate the different kinds of light? Are you saying?
Yes, that was the first accomplishment, is that it gives definition to the light.
Right.
This is another idea that it actually, while naturally they are pulling apart, when we accomplish a fusion, we're pulling them together because that's what the creator wanted. Or in my case, when I put ideas onto paper, it's because that's what I wanted. If I would be so focused on my idea, I'd never write it down. I'd never waste my time to write it down so someone else can read it. But I understand that there's purpose in putting my idea down on paper so someone else can see it. So I'm going to restrain myself from wanting to go to Thailand and never see another person again. And I'm going to write my ideas on a paper, and I'm going to publish it, and I'm going to share it with the world. Again, I'm going against my nature. The light is going against its nature. The vessels are going against their nature to combine and create a beautiful reality. So these are the next two terminologies that we've just learned. There is lights, which is or orot is lights plural. And then there are kalim vessels. Or and kli, light and vessel. Orot and kalim, lights and vessels. Lights and vessels. Now, for this to work, so how do you get these two opposites to come together? How does it happen? How do you get these two things to work together? If they're each pulling in different directions, how do we create this unified reality? Yeah, because Okay. Let's look. Text 4D. They are entirely submitted to God's intent for creation. Namely, that the universe should become an orderly habitat and not be left in chaos. There was a couple that was vacationing in Florida for their honeymoon, and they weren't sure, they didn't decide what they're going to do exactly. So when they land in Florida, they start trying to figure out what they're going to do. So the husband, wanting to show his place and that he's going to be the one that's going to decide what they're going to do, says, honey, if it wasn't for my money, we wouldn't be here. So his wife turns to him and says, dear, if it wasn't for your money, there would be no we. So,
Like,
in other words, so why would these two people, right? Why would this man and woman want to come together if all he wants is to show his strength, and all she wants is, why are they coming together? Why are we doing this? And the same thing above. Why do the lights and vessels come together? And that is because they realize that there is a higher reality, a higher purpose, a higher mission, and they submit to that mission, to that purpose. Imagine you get married and your wife tells you at 2 o'clock in the morning, she wants a bagel or a pickle. You understand something's going on. She wants a pickle, but you don't want to leave her side. You're so in love, you don't want to leave her for a minute. So if you're focused on you, what are you going to do? You're going to open Uber Eats and you're going to order a pickle at 2 o'clock in the morning. But if you're focused on your wife, what are you going to do? You're going to jump into the car and go to the store and get a pickle, even though that's going against your natural instinct and inclination right now. Right now, all you want to do is be next to her. But you know that she wants a pickle, so you're going to go and get a pickle. Why? Why would you do that? Because you understand why you're in this relationship. There is a goal, there's a mission, you want to create a life, you want to bring new life into the world, you want to set an example, you want to continue this project of the world the way God set it up. That's why you're doing this. So you're going to do whatever it takes to make that project continue. In other words, how can you why would you, not how can you, okay, why would you go against your natural instinct? Because you recognize a higher purpose and you submit to that higher purpose. So in Atzilus, the lights and the vessels recognize this higher purpose. God wants there to be a world in which there is light and there are vessels and they come together. And that's why they each submit their natural inclinations and fuse together instead of separating apart.
does
Yes.
one vessel include multiple? In other words, a
Mm.
man is a vessel.
Yeah.
A woman is a vessel. Is marriage a vessel?
Sure. Every idea has light and a vessel.
Right.
Everything there is the light of it, and then there's the vessel. Even vessels technically have a light, right? There's the light of the vessel itself. In other words, why is the vessel here to begin with, right? And what makes it a vessel of kindness, right? That in and of itself is a light. But regardless, that's a digression. Okay. This is all true in our map up until now, up until today's lesson. This is all true in the second edition. I said second edition. That's because God had made a first edition of Atzilus. There's two editions of Atzilus. Remember, Atzilus means emanation, and it's defined by 10 attributes. So the Atzilus that we discussed last week, 2 weeks ago, that is the second edition. Everything we've been speaking about till now, how the world should work, is Atzilus in the second edition. However, there was a first edition. Let's look at the text from the Torah. Text 5. This is from Genesis 1:1. In the beginning of God's creation of the heavens and the earth was chaotic and desolate. Darkness was on the surface of the deep, and God's Spirit hovered over the water. God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. You know the famous joke of the doctor, the engineer, and the lawyer, attorney, that were debating whose profession did God create first. So the engineer said, God created the world. Want to create a world, you need an engineer. So God created engineering first. No, sorry. I messed it up. The doctor said, the doctor came first, right? Because when God created Eve, he put Adam to sleep, right? He put him under anesthesia and then cut him in half and created Eve. He needed a doctor. Fine. The engineer says what the engineer said. That before God created Adam and Eve, he created a world. He needed an engineer. The attorney says, you got it all wrong. In the beginning, it says the earth was chaotic and desolate. Who can create chaos if not for an attorney? Yeah. So the attorney came first. So what does it mean that the earth was chaotic and desolate? What does that mean? So the simple interpretation, if you're reading the verse, it means that God first created matter, energy and matter, but there wasn't a specific place where everything went. And the next 6 days, God placed, and that's why it says he hung the sun and the moon in the skies. In other words, God created everything on the first day, but it was all just a mishkababel. It was all just the elements. God formed it all and placed it all. But Kabbalah says something a lot more, very, very interesting. If you look at the third verse, God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. So what did we just learn up until now? That light, we learned it in lesson 2 and lesson 3, and even today, that light is Atzilus, right? Atzilus is where God has this light that comes from him, emanates from God. That is Atzilus. So that's the third verse. In the second verse, where it says that there was chaos, so here there was a world that came before Atzilus. Let's look at text 6. The earth was chaotic and desolate. This refers to the breaking of the vessels. God's Spirit hovered over the water. This refers to the lights that the vessels failed to absorb. Okay, so we have vessels, broken vessels, lights that aren't absorbed in vessels. What exactly is going on over here? Now, I just want to make a clear, one clear point. Every part of Seder Hishtalshalut, of the order of devolution, was necessary to create the world, including this failed attempt at creating a world. It was all necessary to create the world. Imagine you see someone chopping down a tree and burning it. What would you think about this person? He's trying to get rid of the tree, right? Maybe he needs coal. And in order to get coal, he needs to burn a log. So if you look and you learn, if you read what we just read, that God created a world, created vessels, and it didn't fuse together and the vessels broke, you'd look at that and you might tell yourself that something happened that didn't work properly, so God tried number 2, almost like a book. A person authors a book and realizes it's not so, so he goes for round 2, makes a second edition. This is not the way it is by God. If there is chaos, it's because he wanted it. He designed it. It serves a purpose. And that's what we're going to try to understand is what purpose does this world of chaos serve?
So.
Yeah.
So therefore, when God said, let there be light, there was light, no vessel. Then he produced the stars, the heaven, the sun and the moon as vessels to hold light.
Okay, at 8:30, let's talk about that.
Okay.
So this world, the world of chaos that you have on your map is called in Hebrew tohu. Tohu means chaos, right? Text 7a, page 121. The lights of tohu were intense and powerful. They intensely desired to be nullified and subsumed within their emanating source. They had no sense of what their source wanted of them. As a result, they failed to deviate from their default nature for the sake of submitting to their greater purpose. Okay, so just like the 10 lights of Atzilus emanate from God, in the first edition in Tohu, 10 lights emanate from God. Yeah? Now, what is the natural desire of light? To go back to its source, to go up. That's what the lights of Atzilus wanted to do. They didn't. They controlled themselves because they were aware of God's purpose and fused with vessels. Yeah? They, however, the lights of Tohu, okay, the lights of Tohu preferred to snuggle together with God as opposed to, right, to stay with his wife 2 o'clock in the morning as opposed to go out and get a bagel, get a pickle. In other words, imagine a human hand that isn't exposed to what the mind wants. I'm assuming that this concept exists not in a healthy person, right? You have a human hand, it's a functioning hand, it's not cut off from its source, right? It's a functioning hand, it could do things, but it isn't attached to the brain. In other words, it doesn't do what the brain wants it to do. It does what it wants to do. So the lights by nature have a desire. The desire is to go back to God. But that's their desire. What does the brain want? What does God want? That they should go and do something else. Be vested in vessels. But they're not in touch with that desire. They're in touch with their desire. And so the terminology that he uses in this text is the lights of Tohu were intense and powerful. In other words, if the definition of light is to go back to its source, what does a powerful light mean? That it powerfully wants to go back to its source. It doesn't mean it's a stronger light, because that's not the definition of light. The definition of light is that it's an emanation from, it reveals its source, but it wants to go back to its source. So a powerful light means that it powerfully wants to go back to its source. Yeah, and so this created a problem in the world of Tohu, that you had 10 vessels. The light had zero interest in fusing with the vessels because all it wanted to do was be consumed within its source. Now, don't think that only the light had a problem. The vessels had the exact same problem. The vessels, by definition, want to go down. They don't want light. They just want to be left alone. They don't want to work. They don't want to have to do anything. right? You think the book wants to be processed through machines and stamped with ink, and that the paper wants all of that? You think the paper cares about that? It doesn't want to have anything to do with that. And if the paper was looking out for its own good, it would never let the logger chop it down to begin with. Right? The fish that was caught, the fisherman that caught the fish, and he sees the fish, the beautiful fish, and he says, "Oh, I'm going to bring this fish to the king." The king loves fish. And the fish listens to it, listens to the fisherman say this, and he's thinking to himself, "King, I must be getting royal treatment." And he gets brought to the palace, and he's delivered to the royal chef, and the royal chef looks at the fish and says, "Wow, this fish, the king is going to love this fish." And the fish is sure that the royal chef is the guy who works in the aquarium. And then the chef puts the fish down on the cutting board, and he starts chopping away at the fish. And the fish realizes that the king doesn't love fish. The king loves himself. And the king wants fish. But if the king would love fish, he wouldn't eat the fish, right? Wouldn't kill it. So if the paper would do what the paper wants to do for its own self-preservation, it would never be cut down in the first place. However, so in this tohu, in this world of tohu, we have two problems. The first problem is we have no light, because the light just wants to go back to its source. But don't think we have vessels without light. We also don't have vessels, because the vessels have no interest in sticking around to collect light. Why should they want, right? Why should they want to go against their nature? That they have to be organized in a specific way to produce specific things. So the light wasn't behaving the way light should behave, and the vessels weren't behaving the way vessels should behave. And the result was a broken marriage. There was no marriage, there was no union between the light and the vessels. The light got what it wanted. It wanted to go back. The vessels got what it wanted, what they wanted. They went down. Yeah. And this is indicated by the verse, right? What's the verse? And the Spirit of God was hovering. Why was the Spirit of God hovering? Because it had no vessel. It didn't want to go into the vessels. It didn't want to fuse with the vessels. So it just went back up to its source. So what was left? If the Spirit of God isn't invested in the vessels, what do you have left? Chaos. All you have is chaos. Broken vessels. This is what we call breaking of the vessels, or broken vessels. I want to do a quick exercise with you to bring out why it's called broken vessels and what this means. Just recently, there was a professor that works on the dictionary, whatever, trying to come up with words, and they were trying to come up with a word between 4 and 8 letters to describe salami feet. Okay? Just bear with me for a moment. Salami feet, but not 2 words, 1 word between 4 and 8 letters. So I want you to take a few seconds, think of a word. It can't be a word that it has to be a made-up word. That's between 4 and 8 letters. Write it down, and then under it, write the definition, because like in a dictionary, you have the word and the definition, and the definition is salami feet. For those brave souls that are willing to be creative.
How many were 8?
Between 4 and 8 letters. Do we have any?
Oh.
Salfeet. Okay. Any other
SALFT.
beef feet? Beef feet. Beef. Okay, very good. Beef feet. Okay. Salped. Okay.
so-
All of these, I'm sorry,
Oh, jerky,
jerky.
beef jerky.
Yeah, but that's already a definition of something. Okay, so recognize that the words you just came up with, those are vessels, right? They're random letters that you put together. Why would you ever use those words again in your life? if they had light. What's the light? The definition. Salami feet. Okay. So we successfully did the first part of the exercise. Now, I want you to take your pen and cross out salami feet, because the professor realized that there is no such thing as salami feet. So the definition is lost. Now, what's your word? What is it now? Is it a vessel? The purpose of a vessel is to contain meaning. If the vessel is empty and has no meaning, what is it? It's not a vessel. It's a potential vessel, maybe. But right now, it's not a vessel because it contains nothing. This is called a broken vessel. You have a car that's not working. You call it a broken car. There may not be anything physically broken with it. It may just be missing gas. You still call it broke. It broke down. I broke down. Why? Because it's not doing what it's supposed to do. Remember, we have lights and vessels in Tohu. They didn't do what they were supposed to do. The light went back to its source. The vessels stayed. But these vessels are now broken vessels. They're broken vessels because they serve no purpose, so to speak. They have no light. Now, I just want to be clear for those of you who are mystically inclined. There are other explanations about this world that speak about the shattering of the vessels, intense lights that in different. I started the class by saying that this is one of the most complex issues in Kabbalah, and it's explained in different ways in different places. But ultimately, they all lead back to the same place. Whether you think of the vessels as shattered into pieces or as vessels that are there but serve no purpose, the end point is the same, right? A vessel that shatters also is not a vessel anymore because it's not serving its purpose. If you glue it back together, it'll be a vessel again. If you infuse the vessel with light, it'll be a vessel again. But right now, it is a broken vessel. Okay? So remember, the definition is a broken vessel means that you had a vessel that was a conduit to something. It expressed an idea. The vessel now isn't able to express that idea, whether because the vessel broke or because the light left. In this picture, the vessel broke. In our analogy, the light left, right? Salami feet was the light. And when I said salami feet don't exist, the light left. And now the vessel serves no purpose. And therefore, it becomes its own identity. It's not the vessel it was intended to be. That's considered a broken vessel. And this world that was this idea of vessels, that the light didn't stick around, and therefore now the vessels are broken, is called the world of Tohu. Chaos. Why was it chaotic? Because the breaking of the vessels. Shivirat HaKelim. Kelim are vessels. Shavira is breaking, the breaking of the vessels. So what do? God creates a world with light and vessels. The light doesn't stick around because it has its own motivation. And the vessels now are broken and they're there. There's chaos. So then God creates a second version. And to highlight the difference between the two, whereas this world is called, the first world is called Tohu, what does he name the next world? Tikkun. Or Olam HaTikkun. You might be familiar with Tikkun Olam, but really, where does that idea come from? It comes from not to fix the world. It comes a world, God created a world of fixing. Our purpose here is to fix a previous world that's still here. That previous reality still exists. Remember, spirituality, it's not, there's no past, present, or future. It all exists within a hierarchy. Okay? So those vessels of Tohu are still around. They're still here. We're soon going to see exactly what purpose they serve. They're still here. And Atzilus is to fix Tohu. So the solution is Tikkun. To be And how do you get there? How do you avoid the mistake of tohu? By paying attention to God's purpose, not focusing on what I want to do, but to focus on what God wants me to do. And for whatever reason, we'll soon see, God desired that the first edition, he didn't give lights and vessels that intuition to look past them, to think about higher. And when it came to the second edition, to Tikkun, there he did infuse the lights and vessels with this subconscious notion, idea that there might be something greater than me, that I should bend my own will and desire to try to advance. Okay. So the natural question to ask is, if God knew that this wouldn't work, he didn't give the lights and vessels in Tohu this extra knowledge that they serve a higher purpose, and therefore they each went on their own way. Why did he create it in the first place? So, as we mentioned, every step of Seder Hishtalshalut is for a purpose. God wanted broken vessels. Just like God wanted lights and vessels in Atzilus for our godly soul, God wanted broken vessels because he wanted vessels that were once capable of housing godliness, that were once very godly, and that now aren't or don't feel that way. Okay, so God has something he didn't have before. He has vessels, right? In the godly soul, he has vessels that are godly. In the animal soul, as we'll soon see, he has vessels that were godly and now are selfish, now are looking out for their own desire and not for a higher purpose. So let's look in text 8. This is from the Alter Rebbe. We are comprised of both Tohu and Tikkun, right? Because we are in the image of God. If Tohu is part of Seder Ishtalshalut, on your map, we have Tohu, the world of chaos, on the left side. We also need to have the divine image. We need to have the corresponding image in us. Our godly souls are products of Tikkun, and we'll soon see exactly why, and are therefore inherently subservient to God. Our animal souls and bodies are products of the broken vessels of Tohu. Now, although inanimate objects, plants, and animals are also linked with Tohu, the concept of separation from God is far more pronounced in humans. And that is because all other things cannot sin, and therefore do not become completely separated from God. Humans, by contrast, on account of our bodies and animal souls, are capable of sin and consequently of becoming far more separated from God. We wondered before why we have two souls. Why did God create under our hood two engines? One engine going forward and one engine going backwards. Why? Because he wanted Tohu and Tikkun. Chaos and fixing. Let's see how they correlate to each other. First of all, remember which soul comes into the body first? The animal soul. Which world was first? Tohu, right? Chaos. Tikkun is second. Godly soul comes in second. Remember, the animal soul is self-centered. The godly soul is God-centered, mission-oriented. Tohu, self-centered. Remember, very important to clarify. When a person is self-centered, that leads them away from God. Tohu is self-centered. It leads it closer to God, but it's also away from God because it's away from God's purpose. It's away from God's mission because it's self. So you can have someone who's raised in a very, very, very fine, secluded home, and therefore they grow up to be very good moral a very good moral person because they were raised in that surrounding. They're just as selfish as the kid that grew up involved in crime. Yeah, it's just because this is where he grew up. So we're further away from God. So our selfishness is expressed in sin, whereas Tohu's selfishness is expressed in going back to God because it's what it wants. It's not what God wants. But it's the same idea. It's both selfish, both self-centered. Okay. Then, because of that, the animal soul and Tohu can deviate from the mission, whereas the godly soul is loyal to the mission. Tikkun is loyal to the mission. Also, Tohu is where there are broken vessels. Why is the animal soul compared to broken vessels? If you have someone, by the way, this isn't Jewish specifically, even for someone who isn't Jewish, if their life is just vessels and it has no purpose and meaning, it has no mission, no higher goal, and you eat and drink because tomorrow you're going to die, and it's the only reason you're living life, that type of life has no life. That's a broken vessel, right? So someone who lives an animal soul life will end up being broken. One day they'll have a breakdown, a midlife crisis. Where are we going? What's the purpose? Where's the light? Right? The godly soul infuses light. Who's stronger? The animal soul or the godly soul? We said the animal soul. Where is the light more powerful? In Tohu or Tikkun? In Tohu, because remember, what is light? Light wants to connect to its source. In Tikkun, light was able to break from but in Tikkun, the light just got stronger and stronger and stronger, right? So in Tohu, the light is much stronger, and that's why it can't break from itself, and it just gets consumed in its source. Yeah? So we see a correlation. This is why God wanted these two. God wanted Tohu because he wanted an animal soul. God wanted we should have two souls. Why? Why did God want two souls? Why did God want us? This obviously something pleasing with God creating a car with two engines that are pulling in different directions. But why? Why would that be pleasing to God? So let's look in text 9 from the Arizal. All of the mitzvot are designed exclusively to purify the animal soul and mortal body. Amazing. Why do we do a mitzvah? To purify the animal soul and human body. By contrast, the divine soul does not require rectification. It has no intrinsic need to become installed within an animal soul and mortal body. It says in the Mishnah, a soul is forced into life, right? It has no need for it. It sits together with God. The sole purpose for doing so. So why does the soul acquiesce? Why does the soul give in to God and come into the body? It doesn't want to. It's light. It just wants to stay with God. Why does it come into the body? The sole purpose for doing so is for it to illuminate and rectify the body and the animal soul. Listen to what the Arizal says. Understand this well. The reason the soul descends to this world is to rectify and purify. Excuse me. And this is a very big difference. Someone mentioned 2 times at the beginning of class. It's very popular in today's culture to hear, or popular culture is very common to hear the phrase, an angel on one shoulder and the devil on the other shoulder. And each one is trying to influence me. What's the definition of devil? That it's bad and I have to get rid of it. There's no good that can come from it. The only good that can come is if I break it and kill it, get rid of it. God sent my godly soul. My godly soul is part of God. Why did God separate a part of himself and put him in the world? Because God wanted to take an animal soul that was once godly, right? The animal soul comes from tohu. The vessels of tohu were once godly. And not to break it, but to reintroduce it to godliness. The animal soul has a lot of power. We want to harness that power. We want that drive that drives me to get up to work and go and work 10 hours a day to provide for my family. I want to make that godly and not a natural instinctive life. I want to turn that into a godly life. This is why God created me. Otherwise, he should have kept my godly soul up there, got rid of the broken vessels and finished. But God wanted to take vessels that were once godly, broke, and reintroduce them to godliness.
This understanding this well doesn't make sense. Because it says the reason the soul, which soul?
The godly soul.
It doesn't say.
So I'm telling you.
That makes a big difference.
If you read the first part, you'll see that that's what he's talking about. There's a beautiful Hasidic story where there's a beautiful Hasidic story where there was a Hasid that used to daven, and when he would daven, he would translate the words of davening. I don't know if all of them or some of them, he would translate them into Yiddish. So he would say Baruch, and he would say blessed, Ata, are you, right? In Yiddish, he would translate the words. There's a problem. The problem is that you're not allowed, once in certain parts of the prayer, you're not allowed to speak. You're not allowed to, that was his question. You're not allowed to, whatever, you're not allowed to talk, but to interrupt. You're not allowed to interrupt the words of prayer with other things. And he wasn't sure if his translation is an interruption or not. So he asked the rabbi of his town, my maternal great-great-great-great-grandfather, Peretz Chaim. He asked him if he's allowed to translate the words into Yiddish. So the rabbi asked him, why do you need to do this? If you know the translation, and that's why you're translating it, why do you need to verbalize the translation? So he said, because my animal soul understands Yiddish better. Now,
Okay.
just substitute Yiddish for English. Then the spoken language is Yiddish. Now it's English, okay? So do the same thing in English. If you feel the need to daven in English, why? Because that's what you relate to English. You read Hebrew words, you're not really, your godly soul understands, but your body, right, your mind, your animalistic self, you don't understand the words. So you want to translate it because your animal soul speaks English better. In other words, yeah, the animal soul is not the devil. The animal soul is godliness that is waiting to be woken up, waiting to be reintroduced to its source, but it needs to be worked with. We need to patiently introduce it to a concept that up until now wasn't familiar with. You have someone that can drink for 40 years, and then one day he realizes there's a higher power. Yeah, it takes 40 years for him to realize that. We need to reintroduce the animal soul to the concept there's a higher power. But once the animal soul understands that, and what do we do in prayer? A lot of the prayer is speaking about nature. And when you look at nature, you deduce how great God is. If nature is so awesome, if science is so amazing, could you imagine the one who created it all? We're trying to speak to our animal soul. Our godly soul doesn't need convincing that God is great. Our animal soul needs convincing. And so we spend hours a day and years of our lives and doing mitzvahs where all we're trying to do is strip away at the selfishness of the animal soul and uncover what it really is in its essence. Let's look in text 11. Because up until now, we're thinking that the way to do this is through prayer and mitzvahs. But the Rebbe takes this a step further. sorry, this is Nachum Chernobyler. He was a student of the Baal Shem Tov. So like this, do not assume that the only time we are close to God is while we are engaged in Torah study, prayer, and the performance of a mitzvah, and that we have turned away from God while engaged in earthly endeavors such as eating, drinking, and other needs, which is, by the way, how most religions operate, that there are two domains, and many Jews see Judaism as the same. There's the domain of the godly and the domain of the mundane. This is not the case, for we are instructed, know God in all your ways. All your ways, not God's ways, not when you do a mitzvah, in your ways and the things you do for yourself. Know God there as well. We can connect with God through every endeavor. So the question isn't, should I eat? Should I go to work? Should I engage in conversation? Should I go? That's not the question. The question is, how am I going to eat and sleep and work and go on vacation and do everything else that needs to get done? Am I going to do it for myself, or am I going to do it to serve a higher purpose? And then my godly soul has refined my animal soul. Now my animal soul, instead of an engine, and the animal soul compared to the godly soul is like the jet engine compared to the car engine. Instead of the car engine pulling one way and the jet engine pulling the other way, which is how we feel most of the time when we're torn between going to a Torah class and going to a football game, or whatever it is that we're torn between, we can turn the jet engine in the same direction as the car engine. We can harness the power of the horse, of the animal, of the ox to God. And if we keep our eyes open, we can see this in many areas. I'll just quote two. There's actually, I have two books where in English that a teacher of mine wrote, where he went through the Rebbe's talks and went through many different professions in life, and to learn a lesson in the service of God from many professions. So I came across two of them. The Rebbe spoke on a number of times what we can learn from an attorney and from an engineer. So from an attorney, we can learn that what a good attorney, what does an attorney do? An attorney is going to do whatever is necessary for his client, and he's going to come up with every excuse in the book, no matter what his client did. Doesn't matter if the client killed someone, God forbid. He is going to look for every way to get the client off scot-free. So I'm not suggesting you do that, but what can we learn from this in our service of God? That every Jew that we see, we should look, like an attorney, we should look for the good that's there. We should try to excuse and to justify all the negatives, strip that away, or to make believe it never happened, and to try that what should be visible is the good. I'm sure there are many other lessons you can learn. Just have to think about it. You'll come up with things, how you can serve God and how you can learn from it. An engineer puts together a machine, and there could be hundreds of components, there could be screws. Now, when a lay person looks at this machine, they might think, I can get away without this screw. I need a screw for something else. I'll just take out this screw and put it there. Or, I have an extra screw laying around and it looks like there's a hole. I'll put it here just for safekeeping so it won't get lost. The lay person doesn't understand the details of the machine, but the engineer does. And the same thing, we have mitzvahs. God gave us mitzvahs. The mitzvahs have many, many details. Sometimes we don't understand why certain details are so important. Or sometimes we feel, I can get away with introducing other details or having my own details. We have to remember that God is the engineer that created the mitzvah. Every detail is important. And now what happens? We said before that the divine soul doesn't need rectification. Its purpose is to purify the animal soul, right? It doesn't need anything. Although it doesn't need anything, what happens at the end of the day? It gets something. So it's true, it doesn't need anything. It doesn't come down to get something. But if it converts, and remember, it's not a real conversion because the animal soul at its start was really godly. But if it manages to reintroduce, to refine the animal soul back to its source, now it has 100-fold energy. It has 100 times the energy because it doesn't only have the godly energy in it, it has the energy from Tohu in it. An energy that's capable of destruction, nuclear energy. And it has figured out a way to harness it for life-saving measures. It has figured out a way to utilize it for divine service. Before I conclude with a Hasidic tale, I wanted to again play a nigun, a Hasidic melody, and you can close your eyes if you want to. It can be helpful sometimes. And think about where something that is specifically an animal soul endeavor, eating, sleeping, working, something that's a hobby, whatever it is that's an animal soul endeavor, how you can turn it into a godly soul endeavor, how you can convince your animal soul that instead of, do the same thing, build the bookcase, but instead of building it for yourself, figure out a way to build it for God. Yeah? Think of one area in your life, one thing that happened, one thing that, okay, I'll stop talking and Someone commented, work at something you truly enjoy doing and give all the profits to building a synagogue. Very good endeavor, but it doesn't even have to go that far. Even if the work that you do is to build for yourself a dwelling place for Hashem, right? A mezuzah. A mezuzah isn't cheap. A mezuzah is, I still have mezuzahs that I bought a few months ago, $60. Now I can't find mezuzahs less than $80. Okay? $80 a mezuzah. It's a good thing to have mezuzahs on every door in the home. A lot of money. Work harder, make more money, put up more mezuzahs. All right? Give more tzedakah, absolutely, build a shul. But even within the work that you do, why am I working? Is it because I want to work or I need to work because what's going to be tomorrow? Or is it because it says in the Torah, 6 days a week you should work, and on the 7th day you rest? Why do we work 6 days a week? This class. Because we're here to bring God, fuse God and the world together. I want to just conclude with a story that happened with the Alter Rebbe, the founder of the Chabad movement. There was a chassid that his son went off the beaten path. He left religious observance, and his father really wanted the Rebbe should do something to bring him back. So the next time he visited the Rebbe, he asked the Rebbe what he can do about it. So the Rebbe said, bring your son to me, I'd like to talk to him. But his father said, he's never going to come. He ran away from this. He's not looking to come back. So the Rebbe said, figure out a way. Fine, he goes back home. And he speaks to his friends, trying to come up with a way of convincing his son to go to the Rebbe. And then he came up with an idea. His son loved to ride horses. Now, religious Jews, and we can talk about it after class, generally didn't ride horses. Horse riding on their own. In other words, they went in a buggy with a horse, but didn't sit on top of a horse. Horse riding wasn't something that Jews did, and there's a reason for it. But this boy, this is what he enjoyed doing. And he enjoyed doing it so much that his father convinced him, why don't you go on your horse to the Rebbe to show the Rebbe your horse? This would be like a total victory for the child. So he was excited for the challenge. Gets on his horse and he goes to the Rebbe, comes to the Rebbe, and the Rebbe asks him, how did you get here? So he said, I came by horse. So the Rebbe asks him, why do you enjoy riding a horse? So he said, because if I ever want to go somewhere, I can get there very fast, much faster than any other person. So the Rebbe says, well, what happens if you're traveling somewhere and you get lost? If you're walking, by the time you realize you're lost, you're not that far off the beaten path. But if you're riding a horse, by the time you realize you're lost, you could be way out there. So the boy looks at the Rebbe and says, yeah, but with the same reasoning, once you realize you're lost, you can turn back and get very quickly back to the right path. The Rebbe listens and the Rebbe says, once you realize, and he repeated, once you realize, and a light turned on in the kid. What light turned on? He was full of passion. He was full of energy that he couldn't figure out how to utilize it for godliness. It didn't seem godly. Such immense passion didn't seem godly. So he went elsewhere. He was coming from his animal soul. It was an animal. But when you realize that you have an animal, in order to get back, all it takes to get back on path quickly is from realizing, from recognizing That all of the drives I have, the selfish drives, the drives that pull me away from God, towards myself, away from others, that drive is from the animal soul. Once I realize that I can actually help my service of God with this soul, then I turn back around. And the Rebbe repeated what in Yiddish, once you realize, 2 or 3 times, and the boy fainted. In other words, it was such a realization to him, it was so shocking that he fainted. And he ended up staying by the Alter Rebbe, and he came back to his tradition. We're all riding horses. We all have an animal soul. We all have a horse inside of us that we're riding. All it takes is to come to a class tonight. Hopefully, we leave tonight realizing that the horse we're on, the horse that we think is leading us astray, and that's really what the horse is doing, because it doesn't know better. If we can convince it, and yes, we have to learn a lot, and we have to pray a lot, we have to do a lot of mitzvahs, we have to show the horse that it's worthwhile, that it's worth it. But if we can convince the horse that it's worth it to put our focus on mission instead of self, this can take us to heights and give us strength that we've never had before. I hope you enjoyed. Next week, we will discuss tzimtzum. Tzimtzum. You ever heard of tzimtzum? You'll find out next week. Next week, we'll discuss tzimtzum. And until then, have a wonderful week. You should be getting an email tomorrow with the recording. And if anyone has questions, please feel free to reply. Let me just finish.